Hi, I am Theta. This is Casual Monday for the 12th week of the Fall 2018 anime season, the week of Christmas. Two of the shows we are still talking about had their finale this week, with the other four set for the next. I will not be talking about Iroduku this week, but will address both of the last episodes next video. This is mostly the fault of the SSSS.Gridman finale, which I spent a lot of time on. I'm actually going to release that section as its own video in addition to its place in this one, similar to what I've been doing with the Bunny Girl Senpai videos. The Gridman finale made it possible for me to finally put together the pieces that have been bothering me for about half the series, and I found that so satisfying that I probably went a little overboard getting my thoughts out. So, when you see that video pop up, just know that it is the same excerpt that is contained in here. There is no new information. It is the last section today, so let us go ahead and get to the others. In Bunny Girl Senpai this week, I just want to start off by saying, man, Saga is a freaking champion. Just like last episode, the cliffhanger from the previous week was addressed immediately at the beginning of this week's, as Saga lays out our missing backstory to Mai and Nodoka. It is during this backstory that we learn just why Saga is such a champion. It originates in his encounter with Shoko, a piece of which appeared in the dream which made him emotional last time. Shoko's speech about Saga being able to see further because he is taller, or how some people like the sea breeze and others don't, is basically a description of the concept of empathy. It comes from recognizing that your experience is not universal, that there are as many worlds as there are people, because the world seems like a slightly different place to each of us. No one believes Saga about how he got his injury. His experience is too different from theirs, and they can't accept it. Shoko points out that now that he has had that experience of going through something and having no one believe him, he is set up to be incredibly kind to others. He will empathize with the idea that they are going through something that he may not understand, but is completely real to them. What's more, she has believed him and empathized with his situation. So now he also knows just how good it feels to be on the receiving end of this kindness. Shoko further says that she didn't have any big dreams or high hopes, but she found meaning for her life anyway. That meaning was that her life was an opportunity to become kinder, to be a slightly kinder person each day than she was the day before. This idea affects Saga on a deep level. So much so that even remembering it years later leaves him teary-eyed, and he asks her if he can live his own life this way. He adopts this purpose for his own. It's why he's completely ready to believe Mai when she spins the story of disappearing, or to go through the extreme lie of a false relationship for Tomoe, or drop everything to try to assist Futaba. And it's why he is so unwavering in his commitment to his sister. The very first action we see him take after this new purpose is when he buys the notebook for Kaede on the way home from the hospital. Writing every day is something the doctor has suggested, so he wants to set her up with the tools to do so. On the front of this notebook is a place for one's name, and Saga has already thought ahead to the opportunity this presents. He brings up the subject of her name, but she rushes to insist that she knows how to write it. He then suggests that she write it in hiragana rather than kanji. So here's a quick aside on Japanese. There are three writing systems: kanji, hiragana, and katakana. Hiragana and katakana characters correspond directly to Japanese sounds. They aren't just phonetic alphabets, but they can be used that way, as anything written in either kana will tell you how to pronounce it 100% of the time. The third system, kanji, is not that way. Lots of kanji have at least two pronunciations, and lots of sounds can be represented by multiple different kanji. On top of that, kanji characters themselves each represent a word or idea. If you watched Zombieland Saga this season, They do a gag with this fact back when they first picked their name, and Saki wrote it on the board in kanji before switching it to katakana. This is why you frequently see the exchange in anime when characters will give their name, and then follow up by explaining which characters it is spelled with, as Kaede does here. It's the logic behind Mai's joke earlier about how her own name is spelled by giving no clarification at all. She was famous enough that it was a sure bet that Sakata already knew. The reason for this routine is because most names are spelled with kanji, but not only can the same sound be spelled with different kanji, the same kanji can be pronounced differently. However, it is not unheard of, especially for women, to have their personal name be spelled with hiragana instead. That is the recommendation that Sakata gives Kaede here, as although it will be said the same way, it will be rendered differently. A different name for a different person. He's telling her that he recognizes that who she is after her memory loss is not the same person, and that's okay. For now, she doesn't have to try to be Kaede spelled with kanji, but can just be Kaede spelled with hiragana. Kaede rather than Kaede-san. Suddenly, it makes sense that she always refers to herself in the third person. It only shows up for part of a frame that I could find, but it looks like the sign on her bedroom in the present has her name spelled in hiragana still, instead of the sign we saw at the beginning of this episode that has it spelled in kanji. Now, this little action of Sakata's with the name is an incredible kindness, arrived at only because he attempted to understand what she must be feeling, because he put into practice the approach to life that Shoko professed. Kaede is like a new being, yet everyone is expecting her to be someone else. He is telling her that instead of that someone else, you can just be who you are right now. I accept you as you are. Even without memories, you are a whole person, and I will treat you that way. While this is a touching display and cements Sakata as the central support in Kaede's life, it eventually leads to the real dilemma of this episode. Trying to get Kaede to return to society, which is something she wants, may end up returning her original memories. But Kaede did not simply forget events or people from her past, she actually had a full episode of dissociation and has been a different person. Returning her memories from the past won't simply add them to her current memories, but will supplant them, and will supplant the person she has been for these 2 years or however long it is now. If you've grown quite attached to Kaede, then even if you miss Kaede-san, are you really okay with having the girl who is here today just vanish? I think now that this might be part of why Sakata resisted telling Mai and the rest about the memory loss. If he knows that there exists the possibility that she reverts to who she was, she may not remember any of the friendships that she is creating right now. If you knew that about someone, that they may simply cease to know you one day, wouldn't that stay your hand a little bit as far as befriending them? Sakata wants Kaede to be able to leave the house, to go to school, to be comfortable around strangers again. Having people reluctant to be her friend works against this purpose. The flip side, of course, is that Mai now understands that all her efforts to invest in Kaede and get to know her might get reset to zero. The two of them might turn into strangers. She would have liked to have known that, I imagine. Like, this is not a happy Mai, but that also just underscores the dilemma Sakata faced, that people might have been reluctant to invest in Kaede if they knew, and Kaede's sensitivity means that there's a risk she could pick up on this reluctance. That would just reinforce her self-consciousness and her doubts about getting close to other people. Sakata even explains that seeing her become friends with everyone made it hard for him to speak up. I wonder too if his attachment to current Kaede is why he is so amenable to Kaede taking her time. I truly believe he wants the best for her, but it takes her getting upset about giving up, both last time and this time, for him to push her further. Some part of him may very well dread the day when her memories return because of what that might mean. However, when her distress reaches a fever pitch, whether last time's fear of not being able to leave ever, or this time's weeping at the street corner, it pushes Sakata to make sure she doesn't stop short, even if that means tricking her. Perhaps Sakata was emboldened by the previous instance when he tricked her to going outside. After all, she was not mad about it once she realized what happened, but joyous at having succeeded. Since she gets stopped short from making it to school despite how much she wants to, he comes up with an elaborate ruse. A trip to the zoo scratches another goal off the list, it rewards her for all her effort to be able to go outside, and it distracts her from the turmoil of the day. He even buys an annual pass to get her thinking about future visits, future successes. Very similar to Mai's great move of giving Kaede a ton of outfits to look forward to. Then he leverages her ignorance of the city layout to bring her right up to her school before she has a chance to dread it or be stressed out about it. And just like with stepping outside, once she's actually there, the worry disappears. In fact, it seems like it is the anticipation or fear of the different milestones that causes her problems, not actually reaching them. It's just like how she was anxious about going to the beach last time, but completely carefree once they arrived. That is an understandable pattern, really. Fear of the unknown is usually greater than fear of the known, and so it was consistent to have her always worry about each step until she took it, after which she stopped worrying. What was not consistent, however, was when her bruising would or wouldn't show up. How do we parse this mystery? We've had 4 instances that have occurred in this arc. One was last episode after the first time she answers the phone, the excitement or stress of which causes her to pass out. This time we see it happen twice in the present and once in the past. It happened sometime between the beach trip and the next morning, and it happened in real time when Kaede was trying to force herself to go all the way to school, both in the elevator on the way down and when she finally got stuck on the street corner. The other instance we see was in the past, on the day that her mother exhibited symptoms of her own mental illness. Now, these are all stressful moments, but they haven't been the only ones, right? Going outside that first time didn't cause bruising, nor going to Mai's or to the local park. Even though she was hospitalized this time after the note triggered a memory, there's no indication that she had bruising from that event, nor from going to the zoo, or buying her own pudding, or even from sneaking inside the school after dark. All of those are arguably more stressful situations than that first phone call with Mai, so it can't just be a manifestation of distress. The original bruising and cuts before the memory loss came as a result of bullying, so you would think that some kind of external hostility might be responsible this time, but that wouldn't explain bruising after Mai's phone call, and probably not the time in the past when she was alone with her mother. Now, the only thing that occurs to me requires me to make an assumption about that past event, so forgive me if I end up being way off, but it's possible that all of these instances of bruising were caused by situations that resonated with Kaede-san, the personality inside, and had some element of dread to Kaede. They were moments that brought Kaede-san closer to the surface, or closer to taking over, that the current Kaede had time to worry over. She had time to be fearful about Mai's phone call, and answering the call is a key step. It's the first thing that she crosses off her list. Finally, going to school was the last and biggest thing on the list, so freaking out in anticipation of arriving is also consistent. I am guessing that her bruising after the beach trip had nothing to do with the trip, and everything to do with running into Kano-san. She didn't resolve that distress, but the Kaede-san inside may well have recognized her, and that evening, Kaede worried over the person who knew her, but that she didn't know. When she sees the note in the book and has a memory trigger, Kaede doesn't have time to worry or dread, it just connects directly to Kaede-san. Likewise with showing up at the pandas, or finding herself by the pudding vendor, and suddenly realizing she's at school. All of those were surprises, just like Sakata tricking her into going outside. That just leaves the time in her past. This is me extrapolating, but since he found his mother in a state that seems like she was denying that anything was wrong, I'm going to guess that sometime during that day, the mother treated Kaede as though she was Kaede-san, or refused to believe that the current Kaede couldn't remember. It's an instance of Kaede-san and Kaede colliding, but without Kaede making peace with the situation. As far as I can tell then, that is the pattern. The bruising occurs when Kaede-san gets closer to returning in a way that distresses Kaede. Kaede wants to get better, to cross off the goals on her list, but as she says, she has trouble dealing with people who know Kaede-san. She doesn't like being looked at by people who expect to see Kaede-san. When she has time to think about it, this tension distresses her. But when she doesn't have time to think about it, it just becomes something she reacts to and can then cross off her list. Kaede-san is pushing to the surface, but if she has time to fear this, Kaede pushes back, and the result is a bruise. Now, what keeps me from being very certain about this is the nature of adolescent syndrome, and the information we are still missing about Kaede's past. For example, is the memory loss and resulting personality change a symptom of adolescent syndrome, or is it how she is trying to deal with adolescent syndrome? Is her case of adolescent syndrome limited to the physical effects of being bullied, or is the shift from Kaede-san to Kaede part of it as well? I mentioned before that one of the patterns of adolescent syndrome is that in all the cases we've seen resolved, the person suffering the effects wanted something in the same spirit as the symptoms they ended up with. Adolescent syndrome is almost like a monkey's paw version of granting wishes. Mai wanted anonymity, Tomoe wanted to be able to predict how to fit in, Futaba wanted two things that were incompatible, and Nodoka and Mai were both a little envious of the other. The solutions they got went way overboard, but that makes adolescent syndrome almost like a supernatural version of reductio ad absurdum, of showing the weakness of a belief by taking it to some ridiculous extreme. The really important thing then is that we still don't know what Kaede originally wanted. What exactly led to her being bullied and receiving cuts and bruises because of it? One other thing that is consistent in the cases we've seen is that outside attention plays a role in some way, and even seems to be the catalyst. Mai not wanting attention, Futaba wanting the right kind of attention, Tomoe trying to predict what kind of attention, Nodoka being envious of attention, and so on. If I'm right about the past event with Kaede's mother, then all of the bruising instances we've seen also involve her awareness of outside attention. So perhaps the bruising is still related to adolescent syndrome, but the memory loss is not? Without knowing the origin of all this, it's still hard to say. Maybe now that the original Kaede has returned, she herself can fill in our knowledge gap. Now speaking of Kaede-san, just as with Mai and Nodoka during their appearance swap, we once again have our voice talent and animators using their skill to indicate that the character we are used to is currently a different person. That very last scene with Kaede sounds like a completely separate individual. Her attitude and pitch and enunciation are different, the confidence in her voice is different, the casual way she holds herself is different. She's almost saucy with Sakata. They even make sure she answers his question about whether she is still Kaede in a different way, saying watashi rather than referring to herself in third person, as she did when answering that question in the hospital. I think it's kind of interesting that we have 3 different versions of a mind-body split in our series so far. Futaba had 2 slightly different but opposed personalities, and they each ended up with their own identical body. Mai and Nodoka took on the appearance of the other, but without any underlying change to their personality, and then Kaede replaced one personality with another, but inside the same body. Considering adolescence is a period of one's life when one's mind and body are both changing at different rates, and often seem to be at odds with one another, I find it rather appropriate that so many of our variations center around some kind of mind-body desynchronization. We also this time got a first hint at what Sakata's own version of adolescent syndrome comes from. His chest wound came right after his mother displayed the first signs of having her own mental break. Now, does this mean it was specifically the loss of his mother that causes this in Sakata? Or just that it was an escalation of the situation to a point that it physically affected him also? Or, since he's never shown any other symptoms we know of, Is it possible that his wound is simply collateral damage from Kaide's syndrome? Again, we don't know why hers started yet, so this could be way off, but we have seen Sakata be in an odd position for other instances. He was able to see Mai when no one else in that library could, and was the very last person to remember her. We may have chalked that second situation up to how they felt about each other, but they were still strangers when he saw her in the bunny suit. Likewise, he was the only other person to retain memories when caught in Tomoe's time loop. It was hand-waved by the butt-kicking episode, but what if both these instances and his chest injury are all a result of him being special in some way that makes him react differently to the adolescent syndromes of those around him? Is that even why Shoko is out there on the beach originally, and why she decides to speak to him and then be there every day? Shoko's own mystery doesn't get that much closer to resolution, though we do get a better idea of why Sakata was so taken with her. I'm sure that story was full of mixed emotions for Mai. The situation with Kaede has put last episode's unexplained letter kind of on the back burner, but I expect it to return to our attention before the finale is over. I'm struck now by the first thing that Shoko ever said to Sakata. Apropos of nothing, she begins telling him about how far out one can see the horizon at eye level. 4 kilometers is a tiny sliver of the thousands of kilometers that are actually out there, yet this is as far as one can see on their own. Do you think perhaps she is being metaphoric, that one can only see a small part of the situation at a time, or on their own? Or that one can only see so far into the future, with the rest completely occluded by the part that one can see? She will even later reuse the horizon as an example of the differences between people, pointing out that Sakata can see further than her because he is taller. Maybe he also can see more of a situation than others, enabling him to help them solve problems that they can't manage on their own. Even if they are gazing out to sea, it's a very odd thing to lead with when chatting up a stranger, unless it has some other subtext, as I am suggesting. I've said this before, but I also suspect that even though Shoko is a stranger to Sakata at this point, he is not a stranger to her. So, time travel of some sorts? I mean, that would fit into our quasi-physics parallels. Or, instead, to fit into our pattern of mind-body desync, she becomes maybe unstuck in time, with her mental and physical age skipping between different points of her lifespan. Considering the Kaede focus, I expect to only get more questions on this point, but I won't be surprised if they set up next year's movie with a stinger right at the end of our finale. So one last thing is that I want to make sure we recognize that Kaede did not walk into our cliffhanger situation blindly. She overheard Sakata mentioning the possibility of her current self disappearing, yet it is after this that she mentions wanting to go back to school, as it is the top thing on her list. I don't know if she assumed her personalities would swap again, or hoped they would, or feared they would, but she walked into this willingly, and even seems to have a sense of urgency that comes from this knowledge. I think we'll have to see her history around the bullying to guess why she gets this new determination. But I will say that considering the personality change, the memory loss was actually a bigger deal than the cuts and bruising from bullying. That ending should have felt like victory, but it doesn't, right? We in the audience find ourselves in a similar bind to Sakata and especially Mai. Kaede-san's return is good on paper, but it fills us with apprehension. Did we just exchange a familiar friend for a stranger? I'm glad we only have to wait a week to find out. In Zombieland Saga's finale, I have to say, man, those girls really brought the house down. I said last time that I would probably prefer that the mystery of their origin and how the zombie thing works and all that remain mysterious, and I got my wish. The one thing I did want answered, though, was how Kotaro was connected to this, especially if he was connected to why Sakura was chosen. As we discussed, the pattern suggested that someone from Sakura's original life would be nearby or involved in her crisis being solved, with the guess that Kotaro would be that person for lack of any other option. and that seems to have been borne out. It looks like he is a classmate, with the 10-year time gap making him unrecognizable to Sakura. I guess maybe he introduced her to Iron Frill, or she did so to him? It's unclear from that short memory, but he was aware of her interest in idols there at the end. Is it possible then that he has resurrected all of these other girls purely to try to make her last wish a reality? That gives a lot of extra context to his speech last episode, which is referenced a few times in this finale, where he yells that he will never abandon her. Imagine for a moment then that Kotaro has bent his will for the past decade to helping Sakura, for reasons we don't yet understand. Either learning how to resurrect people or finding someone who could, all the effort to become a makeup expert to make them pass as human, and then whatever was required to set up this building that they all live in. Not to mention the actual music composition, which as far as I can tell is either created by him or he arranges for its creation. Then, whatever steps are required to get all these costumes and do all this networking that he's done, and he would have had to keep it all on the down low this whole time. I could easily see that taking 10 years of effort to get all the ducks in a row. That is a lot of effort, which makes me wonder if he was motivated by having a crush on Sakura, or being the one who hit her with a car and feeling like he has to atone. I mean, he did hit Junko with the van at one point, after all. Whatever the reason, all his extra effort makes me especially curious about how much input he has to their songs. I don't feel like one even needs to explain the dominant themes of this anime, because just reading the lyrics to the song they perform when Sakura rises up to rejoin them is basically a retelling of the series. I do like that they did not overturn Sakura's pattern of having really bad luck, and instead drug the entire performance into her misfortune. I actually wonder now how many of the setbacks that Fran Shushu has experienced were simply collateral damage to Sakura's unlucky existence. But, as we have noted, the group gets to decide who they are rather than aligning themselves to some fabricated image. Who they are defies easy categorization due to their very personalities, appearances, and even time periods, but over and over, the only thing that was consistent was that they do things together. That pattern culminates with this episode, and their decision that they would rather fail with Sakura on stage than succeed without her. The only permanent, important rule is that they try, fail, or succeed as one. You know, we started off with this anime that seemed to be about zombies, but wasn't really a zombie story. Then they were supposed to be idols, sure, but they don't do anything recognizably idol-like until the third episode, and even then it seemed more like satire. Yet, as we've come down the stretch, Zombieland Saga has morphed into a full-blown idol series, with all of the usual patterns of overcoming personal hang-ups, intra-group friction, and external bad luck. Ending with a performance that is a success for both narrative and character journeys is about as idol show as you can get. I feel like this was a Trojan horse, drawing you in to enjoy the idol genre by masquerading as something else until it's too late. You're invested in the characters and humor, and you're going to stick around to the finale. That said, it's still not quite a standard idol show, and the stinger at the end not only teases a continuation of the story, it suggests that their secret may not remain so forever. I'm uncertain if it will be a bigger deal for this up-and-coming idol group to turn out to be the undead, or if it's a bigger deal for people to find out that zombies exist at all. Does this setup even work if they no longer have to keep their heads down to hide what they are? A lot of our humor originates from trying to play it cool when someone's head falls off, or Tai tries to eat someone. Giving the girls something like autonomy and having society accept them and their circumstance sounds great for their well-being, but that's also probably the end of the show's concept. Anyway, for now, there is actually quite a few outsiders who know or at least suspect the truth. There's actually a scene at the end where it cuts in sequence between everyone we know that recognizes the girls from before. Iron Frill, watching the performance, no doubt recognizes Ai, who for some reason insists on using the same hair decks, and then the bartender from last time, who knows Yugiri. There's also the journalist who has been suspicious ever since the drive-in Tory commercial. It's unclear which of them he thinks he recognizes, though my money is on Junko, since he has a picture of her there at the very end. Then there is Lily's father, of course, watching Lily. Same with Saki's former best friend and her daughter. And then it also cuts to Kotaro, who we now know knew Sakura from before. If I'm right about the journalist recognizing Junko, then that sequence of shots basically covered someone who knows every girl from their original life, except for the legendary Tai. By the way, if you are ever rewatching this series, I highly recommend keeping an eye on her during all of their routines for some bonus entertainment. Aside from that though, the mystery of who she is and why she is still not fully awake continues. Just like the masquerade of hiding their zombie nature, the day that her mystery is over is also the day that that source of humor will end. I thought they might have made her wake up at some climactic moment, but they actually managed to make her involvement in encouraging Sakura more heartwarming than it would have been if she was just like everyone else. Remembering things like the radio calisthenics from way back already suggests that she's not 100% zombie like in episode 1. But I still want to know, how unobservant are their fans not to pick up on how rough her part of the performances are? Anyway, they have left themselves plenty of space to continue the series if they wish, and intentionally keeping some things mysterious in the finale, like cutting away from Kotaro when he takes off his sunglasses, suggests that they are teasing us into the future on purpose. At least we got Yugiri slapping someone when it was appropriate for a change. Like most comedies, there was less work to do on this series from week to week than some of the character-driven dramas or ontological mysteries, but I'm glad that I visited this one as often as I did. If we do get another dose of this in the future, I would be curious to see if they continue the half-satire of the idol industry, or if they continue the pattern of our final episodes and make it into a true idol show. Except, with zombies. Bloom Into You this week positioned itself strongly for its finale, and while I get the sense that there is still a lot of story to be told, next week appears primed for a major shift in how characters understand each other and themselves. Last week ended with you aware that Nanami was troubled, and yet found herself unable to offer any comfort or concern. The need to keep up her end of not falling for Nanami has become increasingly difficult and unlikely, and this stays her hand in situations where she might otherwise have been very forthright. This episode begins with you realizing Nanami has gone outside to be alone, and she has a second opportunity to ask after her, and yet she still cannot. This is quite the change from the episode just before the campaign speeches, where not only did you make an excuse to get Nanami outside and alone, but she cuts right to the quick and addresses Nanami's nervousness, inviting her to share her vulnerability. Because of their mask-wearing stalemate, Yu has actually become less able to support Nanami at the same pace that she is growing more fond of her. Now, several episodes in a row of wanting to say something but not being able points towards her finally breaking through and saying her piece in our finale. We did get very close to Yu being honest with herself, at least, in the second half of this episode, where she is very troubled at Nanami's admission that she hates herself. While Nanami uses this as a rationale for why Yu shouldn't love her, that she can't be with someone who likes what she hates, Yu is bothered by the inverse of that Nanami hates something that she likes. Being able to admit at least this much to herself inspires Yu to call up Koyomi and try to persuade her to change the play and why she feels they should. By the very end, she knows that what she really wants is to be able to change Nanami as surely as they are altering the play. Now, we will revisit that again in a moment. I just first want to visit the scene where Yu learns what was troubling Nanami, the things she started out being unable to ask. One of the things I think the series has excelled at is its portrayal of intimacy. I don't mean physical affection, even though that is part of it. Most of the scenes where you and Nanami are alone involve this very gentle back and forth, where although they take some comfort and pleasure in each other's company, there are also moments of retreat. Sometimes this is a gesture or an expression, sometimes it is something conspicuously unsaid, but most of the time we see one or both of them hesitate at some personal threshold. These thresholds are all the little moments where they could be experiencing true intimacy, but because of their imposed boundaries, they pull back instead. The consistency of these events underscore how forced or unnatural their arrangement is, while the fact that they keep coming up suggests that they could draw close to one another if given a real chance. Now, physical intimacy often opens someone up to showing their vulnerability, to being intimate in other ways, and Yu has learned this to be true of Nanami. Inviting her back to her room, even guilting her about keeping her own end of the deal, is not really about Yu missing Nanami once they are apart. It's more about her creating a space in which Nanami will open up to her so that she can understand the trouble. Yes, kissing and acting on lewd thoughts can create the space for intimacy, but the show makes sure to give us other displays of physical affection, such as idly playing with hair, or a loose embrace, or simply resting one's head on the other. These tiny gestures are just as private and intimate as actions that get their heart racing. They likewise create a mood of trust where one's inner thoughts can be safely shared. Intimacy consists of all these different pieces, but they are prevented from going any further by Nanami's self-loathing and Yu's inability to challenge it. Thus, I feel our finale isn't set to resolve their issue for all time, or magically make it okay for them to be in a public, romantic relationship, but it might begin to erode these barriers which prevent them. The key to that appears to be our stage play. Like we mentioned, Koyomi's uncertainty about the ending last time foreshadowed that it would change in some way, and this time we got to actually see the original ending performed. While Nanami had a very emotional reaction to the first part of the play, and indeed, it's a frighteningly accurate parallel to the situation between her and her sister, we also observe that she does not have the same reaction to the second half. That first situation resonates with the part of her that is troubled, but the second half is a near match to the solution that she has been pursuing. She chooses a person to become, and then does so. Nanami is choosing the person she thought her sister was, rather than the person the character's lover thinks she is, but it's otherwise the same idea, of being someone on purpose. Like I said last time, we in the audience might have expected and been rooting for her to choose the mask that her lover knows, that Yu knows, but these two episodes tell us to expect something different. Changing the play's ending into something that discombobulates Nanami as much as the first half may present an opportunity for Yu to challenge Nanami's determination to wear her sister's mask. The revelation about Mio being so different than both herself and the person she saw has already undermined Nanami's confidence in her plan. The play as is supports Nanami's course of action, but if it is changed enough, it might fill Nanami with enough uncertainty that she is opened to just the kind of change that Yu hopes for. Now, assuming she gets this chance, what should Yu do with it? Confessing to Nanami, and also to herself, that she feels something for her senpai seems like the obvious play, but I will say that it is not without peril. If you've ever been involved with someone with self-esteem issues, this next part might sound familiar, but it otherwise could seem counterintuitive. Essentially, when someone thinks very little of themselves, attempts to shore up their confidence can instead just erode their opinion of you. Telling someone they are worthwhile when they believe they are not can make them consider that they have the wrong idea about themselves. But it can also make them just think that they have the wrong idea about you. They hate or belittle themselves, and if you don't find them hateful or pathetic, it just means that your judgment must be suspect. Then, even the things they did believe from you become suspect as well. This sentiment is pretty well illustrated by Nanami's statement that she can't be in love with someone who likes the things she hates. Her distaste is more likely to extend to you than it is to recede from herself. Or at least, that's what she thinks right now. It seems we have two possible outcomes, though we may not get that far in one episode. Either Yu stops liking Nanami, or Nanami stops hating herself. One of those will probably make both of them unhappy, while the other might make both of them happy, and so both you and the audience are rooting for the latter. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll get it, but the focus on the play once again has a bit of a meta element to it. Yu argues that the ending is wrong because the main character's decision is based on her past self. It's based on a character that the audience doesn't know. There is no progression of who she is over the course of the performance, which means that the portion of this character's story that the audience sees is kind of pointless. They have no connection to who she used to be, yet that person is the one making the final choice, essentially overriding the character they've come to know. Well, the same thing goes for Nanami in Bloom Into You. If she continues to try to replace her sister, then the person still driving her life isn't the character we have gotten to know, but that little elementary school girl. Little short-haired 10 or 11-year-old Nanami is calling the shots over the accomplished and grown Nanami. That makes it feel like no progress has been made at all, not just over the course of our series, but over her past 7 years. No wonder she had such a crisis of self. And yet, if Yu continues to stop short of saying what she wants to say, and still believes herself incapable of falling in love by this time next week, then the same problem will extend to her as well. She too will have failed to take a real step on her character journey. The person calling the shots and making the final decision will not be the Yu whose growth we have absolutely seen take place. It will be the Yu in episode 1, still torn up about not being able to return the affection of her middle school friend. The focus of the conflict in our series' last arc has been Nanami and her inner struggle, but Yu is the actual main character. She is the one who needs to be driving the story in the end. The character in the play is just as much a parallel to Yu herself, and likewise cannot end by simply choosing a mask to wear, to be the someone that she was when all of this started. I would argue that Yu facing herself and her growth and realizing that she is capable of loving someone is actually much more important than Nanami facing the problems with her own actions. Hopefully, next time we might get to see a little bit of both, but if it can only be one person to change, then I hope it is Yu. Goblin Slayer comes back from its oddly timed hiatus with gusto, giving us the first half of this season's final showdown throwdown. A horde of goblins plotting to attack the farm seems like another disaster in the making, but at least so far it has been waylaid. While Goblin Slayer's strategy seems like the key contribution, success was actually born from the actions of two different people, the farm girl and the priestess. The farm girl has really done several things for Goblin Slayer. She looks after him as much as he will let her, she keeps her uncle from driving him away as he seems to want, and her presence gives Goblin Slayer a semblance of his old life to protect and to return to after each foray, to always be there when he wants to come home. She enables and embodies the last shred of normalcy from his youth, giving him at least some purpose beyond the never-ending quest to kill more goblins. It is just this last sliver of his old life that he is loath to abandon when he realizes the farm will come under attack. That's no reason for anyone else to die, though, and so he tries to get Farm Girl to flee. The thing she does for him this episode, then, is to refuse. Goblin Slayer knows he can't fight against 100 goblins in an open field and succeed, but that is not going to stop him from trying if the only cost is his own life. He's happy to die like a nail hammered into a coffin. When she refuses to leave, though, facing down the horde alone is no longer good enough. He needs to do whatever possible to ensure she survives, and if he wants to keep her from crying, he needs to survive as well. Thus does he go to the adventuring hall to do something we have never seen happen before. he asks for help. Now, before the events of this season, and partially into it, Goblin Slayer has been motivated by revenge, of being vengeance incarnate. It's why he was a solo adventurer and placed little value in camaraderie or prestige. It's why other adventurers want no part of him, why they regard him with contempt and amusement. Having never been part of the community, he has no standing to ask a favor, especially one of this magnitude. He's offered no past alliance or aid, he has no leverage or favors owed. This single-minded obsession, which is his very hallmark, is almost the thing that dooms him. Fortunately for him, our priestess has stuck to him like glue in spite of his attempts to push her away. Not only does she insist on partying with him, she confronts him repeatedly about his lacking personal skills and tries to help him improve. And there is progress, however glacial, resulting in him partying with others as a regular thing and even showing his vulnerable side to her. Without her influence and her own single-minded dedication to him, he would never have gathered the experience of fighting with different party members and merging their skill sets into a comprehensive battle plan. Without her constantly rebuffing him for his attempts to refuse help, he would never have been able to ask for it now. Without the priestess opening him up, and without the farm girl to drive him, he would not have succeeded with the guild. He does succeed, and it's because of his earnestness, a mirror to the earnest devotion that both of those girls have shown him. When the adventurers turn down his request for a favor, and as I said, this is just the treatment he has earned, it's instead put forth that they are adventurers. That is all they are to him, and adventurers are hired. What will you pay for this unpleasant and unglamorous request? His offer is everything. Everything in his discretion down to his last possession or thought, save only his own life. The wealth that may or may not represent is not what gets their attention. I mean, they probably suspect him to be rather poor on account of his shabby equipment, right? Rather, the offer of everything means that his request is far from idle. Here's the guy who's literally made it to silver rank on his goblin-killing volume and prowess, and yet he's in here asking for help killing goblins. Beggaring himself for a single quest is like drawing a giant circle around how singular this is. It's such a desperate, humbling offer that it almost shames them to refuse. Slowly but surely they come around, each making whatever excuse necessary to allow themselves to accept. When the guild girl arranges for additional monetary bounties, any remaining holdouts can simply chalk it up to business as usual. These rationalizations help each of them deal with their cognitive dissonance, but the truth is that the shame of doing something like goblin slaying turns out to be less than the shame of turning down such an extraordinary and earnest request. This is also significant to our understanding of his character. We've seen him be indefatigable in his pursuit of creative ways to slaughter goblins, in his acceptance of any and all missions to kill them, and in his fights that bring him to the brink of death. Yet the thing that moves him to offer everything, to even ask for help at all, is not to seek and destroy, but to guard and preserve. For what may be the first time, his motivation is not to attack, but to protect, and he goes all in. Now, the farm defense strategy has played out perfectly so far. I have to imagine that many of these adventurers will see him in a new light after this whole ordeal. That said, it's going perhaps a little too well, so we should be a little anxious about our finale despite that last scene of heavy metal intensifying. The person of the Goblin Lord has been built up quite a bit, I think, not just in this episode, but in some earlier references. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get more than just a pitched battle between him and Goblin Slayer. Considering the whole analogy earlier in the season about how Goblin Slayer's own survival and improvement made him like a goblin to them, it would be a nice parallel to show a similar journey for this Goblin Lord. I'm not sure a goblin backstory is really in the cards, since we never really understand their speech, but it would be a very nice thematic tie-in for our finale. Lastly then, we have our other finale, SSSS.Gridman. I freely confess that I have not been able to give this one the space and attention that it deserves. The combination of my work schedule, releasing on Monday, and then this one coming out on Saturday alongside others means that it gets short shrift. Works from earlier in the week give me several days to mull over, while I'm usually trying to finish the entire script the same day that this one premieres. It's a shame that my circumstance does not let me stop everything and make a separate video just for my retrospective on the series. Future channel goals, I guess. The reason I feel particularly frustrated over these constraints is because I am not particularly a fan of the whole tokusatsu thing that this series is based around, and yet I found it compelling anyway. I think I even said way back during the first episode that I was interested in everything I saw, besides the monster versus robot stuff. I've even wondered to myself at times what the series would look like with the same characters and setting, but a different genre for the action set pieces. However, with the ending revealing a link to the real world of live-action people and the created world of the anime, suddenly the choice of genre gets added subtext. Tokusatsu shows were live-action, with actors in suits fighting in scaled-down sets to simulate giant kaiju. This is one of the things that separates it from the mecha genre, which has no tradition of being live-action, despite both of them involving giant robots. Making an animated show based on tokusatsu properties is one more step away from the realism of actors in suits, and so to have our created world and the events inside it also be one more step away from reality in-universe helps reinforce the artificial nature of the world that Akane creates. That is, no one would confuse anime settings and characters for actuality. It is clearly a crafted world. This reinforces why Akane is a god, being one step higher in realism, while also linking our two mediums together across the same genre. Now that all said, I don't think it is appropriate to take our ending and conclude that the whole thing was a dream that girl had one night. The trope of, it was all just a dream, is derided for very good reason. For those of you also watching Goblin Slayer, it's the same reason that I reject the idea that series is just someone's D&D campaign animated, with the gods being the people playing the game. The problem with that series just being a game of pretend, or this series just being a dream, is the same problem. The storytellers have asked us to treat their characters and their struggles as authentic, to empathize with their successes and failures, and to believe in the realness of who they are. The act of experiencing a story is often referred to as the willing suspension of disbelief, and one of a writer's primary goals is to maintain that suspension of disbelief. Revealing that a story or its characters weren't real in-universe violates the trust that the audience has put in the storyteller. It's like explaining how a magic trick is done before it's even complete, or giving away the punchline to a joke in the middle of the telling. There's a very technical term for this kind of thing, and that term is lame. That doesn't stop people from doing it, of course, but I think in the case of Gridman, the dream is not just a fleeting, imaginary exercise that vanishes as soon as the girl wakes up to reality. In fact, it doesn't seem to disappear at all after Akane leaves it. Instead, it is its own distinct reality, but was created by that girl in the course of her dream. There are a lot of things left unexplained by the show, which I'm totally fine with, but it does leave us only guessing about the wider reality. It's likely a greater familiarity with tokusatsu shows would make my guesses more accurate, but I do think we can safely assume that all the things Alexis and Akane say about her coming from another world and creating the city and the people in it, and the kaiju being created from her heart, all of that I think applies to the girl at the end. Since Gridman also indicates that he came from outside, and then leaves to go outside again, then I think it's reasonable to conclude that the city that Alexis enabled Akane to create actually exists somewhere. Hyper Agent Gridman likely bounces between various realities trying to stop this kind of behavior, And it just so happens that some of these realities aren't live action, but are animated worlds instead, sometimes with the dreaming creator still inside. This may even explain why we had things like the loss of his memory, or needing to dwell in both Yuta and Junk, and why at first he and the four weapons had trouble fighting simultaneously. If it was just a dream that contained them, then I feel like these issues of compatibility wouldn't exist. The disparity between two different realities, though, suggests that both of them are just that, realities. So maybe our girl at the end was both a tokusatsu fan and an anime fan, and the world she dreamed into existence a combination of the two, leaving Gridman a bit out of sorts when it came to try to thwart Alexis. Now, I'm not running with this interpretation just to make the story real on a technicality. There are a lot of indicators that the city we see and the turmoil Akane experiences had their basis in a different reality. I've been guessing for a long time that the city was based on some earlier existence of Akane's, that she replicated her own life that existed before Alexis found her. This made the city and her home and her class and all the people in it not a fresh and original reality, but an idealization of her original reality. It answers the question, why does God go to school? The city was a grand wish fulfillment fantasy, her ideal world where Akane is superlatively beautiful and popular and has this exciting secret life and can remove all the things that annoy her, and so on. It seemed less like a fresh world created from scratch, and more like a world someone already knew, except that they changed the things they didn't like into things they did. So, what this city and the series become are not a random bit of fancy, but a journey into the psyche of the girl who wakes up at the end. Because of how Akane has set up the world, we can guess that in reality, she is not superlatively popular or considered the most beautiful in her school. Because she wants to control every little thing, we can guess that she feels no sense of control in reality. Because she lives in this huge expensive house, we can guess that she probably has modest accommodations in her life, and so on. Even something like Akane having big boobs probably means that her real self does not. However, the things she likes, or at least doesn't hate, remain the same. She copies all of that, instead of creating every little detail from scratch, or maybe changes just superficial things. For example, at the end, we can see the girl's uniform hanging up at the end of her bed, and it's practically the same uniform we see in the end credits, with just the tie color changed. Same with the hoodie, same with the pass holder and the headphones. All the same, just different colors. I think it's reasonable to assume then that almost every detail in the city is a copy from her reality that she used as a base, with slight changes as she saw fit. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the end credits, most of the environment is not actually drawn, but are photographs that have been processed to blend better with the characters superimposed on them. This is probably from the girl at the end's reality, and the few shots we see from inside the classroom match up pretty well with the animated version of that classroom. So I think everything started out as her original city, including all of the people in it. As I said last time, why would a god create a bunch of people she found annoying just to have to remove them later? More likely is that she copied existing people in to populate her world, and then started taking away what she didn't like. And, as I pointed out last time, Auntie's signature power is the ability to copy. So I think that aside from creating kaiju, her imaginative powers were simply limited. This is probably part of why nothing exists beyond the city. The other part, I would guess, is a lack of self-confidence, which is probably also where her desire to be beautiful and popular comes from, as well as the dark emotions that attract Alexis in the first place. She can create kaiju because they come from the negative emotions in her heart, and for a time, that means she can make the world she thinks she wants. But as time goes on, she does more and more extreme things, culminating in her stabbing of Yuta, and so her own self-loathing increases. She's been in a downward spiral since her plan to wreck the school festival was thwarted, and I guess at some point she has had a "what have I become" moment. Thus, as the series made clear some time ago, The Gridman alliance has more to do than just fighting Akane's creations. They must also help fix her heart. The fact that Auntie came from her heart, as all kaiju do, and yet was able to become a person in his own right, and even turn against her, already suggested that such a change was possible in her. On a macro level then, this entire series has been about Gridman rescuing the girl at the end from the prison of her own dark emotions, which narratively also means allowing her to leave this world and wake up in her original one. Now, you may have noticed I keep referring to the girl at the end rather than naming her. That live-action scene begins with a shot of the pass holder that Rika owns, and she also gifts to Akane, though in blue instead of pink. We see the uniform, we see her book bag beside it, we see that hoodie. There's even a picture frame in the back that I'm pretty sure says Akane. Then we see a girl wake up and look around. Now, the shot could have ended just there, as all the details in that room were enough to suggest that this was Akane waking up, and thus being the god leaving her dream world. But the shot doesn't end there. The last frame is that girl sitting up in bed and tilting her head back while framed by her window. Now, human eyesight is naturally drawn to bright areas, movement, and areas of high contrast. A cinematographer knows to keep these facts in mind when composing a shot. This final frame of the girl is silhouetted against the complete white of an overexposed window, and that creates a contrast with one element in particular, an element further emphasized by the motion of her head: her hair. Why call attention to the girl's hair? Well, this girl does not have Akane's haircut, she has Rika's haircut. Short bangs across the forehead, and hair past shoulders but above her elbows. Actually, looking beyond her to where the uniform hangs, there is also a cream-colored sweater, which should remind you of someone's default outfit. Though we did see Akane's over-the-ear headphones in that first shot, beside them are the earbuds that we always see Rika wear, just in yellow instead of blue, as surely as the pass holder is blue instead of pink. Leaning against the bed is a keyboard of all things, yet it wasn't Akane we see preoccupied with music, but Rika. So what does that mean? Well, the thing that makes most sense to me is that Rika in the created city is based off Akane in real life. Like I said, she literally copy-pasted her own reality for a starting point. It's probably why Rika's living space is rich with details and imperfections and personality, while Akane's is empty aside from the kaiju. If the junk shop and their modest home is based off Akane's real-life situation, then giving herself this giant, immaculate mansion makes sense in the same way that giving herself an idealized appearance and social life does. In reality, would a house like that end up side by side with a secondhand goods store? Probably not, right? So, Rika in the city is based off the real Akane, while Akane is an idealized version of herself. The end credits become kind of interesting in that light, and even tell a bit of a story. I already said in a previous video that the change in uniforms made me think that those end credits came from an original reality instead of the city we've seen. That might be half right. It starts with just Rika and detail shots of the school, implying her wandering around and alone in thought. Her two friends we're familiar with from the Dream City show up, and we also see other students in hallways and the background. She's actually not sitting in her normal seat, but is sitting where Yuta usually is. Then Akane shows up. From then on, we never see the other students. It's just Akane and Rika. Real Akane and her imagined ideal self. Thus, these next scenes of them spending all this happy time together are not real. Whether this is a daydream, or the original form of the city before she added others, or just a representation of the two sides of Akane coming to terms, I'm not sure. Maybe any of those. At this point, they are even wearing identical clothing, red tie and all, though we don't see anyone else dressed exactly this way. It's like she has an imaginary friend that is just a fantasy version of herself, and maybe that became the basis of Akane the god. But at the very end, it's just Rika. Her fogged breath indicates that it is cold, and the last thing we saw happening in the Dream City is that it began snowing. So that last bit may well be reminiscing in the city after Akane had left it. Regardless of what exactly it means, it syncs up with the importance of Rika and Akane coming to terms in our finale. Rika is Akane's original self, and so if Rika can accept Akane even after her terrible behavior, then maybe real Akane can also accept herself. At the end of last episode, this almost actually happened. Akane and Rika are speaking on the roof, and Akane dismissing all of Rika's efforts to reach her because she's just a creation. She has to love her. But then, Rika asks Akane what she thinks of her. In other words, what do you think of yourself? Akane hesitates, and then Alexis chooses that exact moment to step in and break up the conversation. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that that was no accident. Fast forward to almost the end of this finale. Rika and Akane are sitting in her room after Akane has decided to leave. She can't stay after all that she's done. She begins to detail all of her failings, and Rika keeps saying she knows, finally adding that, "I know all the things that you are." Rika will give her the gift of the pass holder, explaining that wherever you go, you're just like me. She tells her to make sure she makes an impression wherever she goes, and then makes a last request. She wishes they could be together, and then says she hopes that this wish never comes true. That is, she hopes Akane, real Akane, never retreats back into the dream world again. She hopes that she never has a reason to. With that, Akane does leave the world, with only Rika's eyes widening the moment she stops feeling her hand to indicate the moment. Really a well-executed scene all the way around. Now, this whole Rika is the original Akane thing helps me figure out a lot of things that I struggled with last time, which I will get to in a second. I just first want to point out how we can now see how much the excellent Dream episode related to the rest of the series. The three each realize that they are in a dream, and so want to wake up. If you remember me talking about suspension of disbelief at the beginning of this segment, having their illusions shattered by realizing they are dreaming is a pretty similar phenomenon. When each figures it out, Akane tries to convince them not to leave. At the time, it seems like stopping them is just part of her plan to defeat Gridman, but she seems really upset at her failure, right? Key to that distress is the way she tries to convince them. Rather than deny that it's a dream once they realize, she argues for the value of dreaming. She asks Rika what's wrong with a dream. Let's keep it going just like this. To Yuta she asks, wouldn't you rather dream forever? This isn't about them at all. It's about her wanting to stay in this dream she's created, safe from the real world that she comes from. Yuta's answer to her is that dreams are things you wake from. That goes for everyone, even you. And Akane, looking positively miserable, only says, I wish I could stay in a dream forever. Their rejection of the idealized world she gave them should have been a clue to her that she needed to reject this idealized reality that she had built, but she wasn't quite ready to let go. Now, Rika actually being original Akane helped me make sense of one of the discrepancies in these dreams, which was part of the group of mysteries that I had been having trouble rectifying. I'd assumed these were all based on real people, and the way Akane acted toward Yuta at times, and Yuta being chosen by Gridman and all that, made me wonder if the original Akane had a crush on the original Yuta, with Yuta either not realizing it or crushing on the real Rika instead. There were holes in that, but now I think I see how it all connects. The unexplained things were these. Why did Akane make herself a love interest in Yuta's dream rather than a friend like in the other two? Why was Yuta sitting next to Akane with her friend Rika in the opposite corner when presumably Akane could control the seating chart? What happened between Yuta and Rika the day he lost his memory and passed out in front of the shop? Why did Akane put on the come hither act when she showed up in Yuta's room? And lastly, why did Gridman choose Yuta in the first place? This last one was even brought up again as a question right at the end, with them even pointing out that maybe it was because he sat next to her. But Rika wonders if that was the only reason, and her mind flits to a moment of catching Yuta looking her way. So she suspects then that Yuta having feelings for her may be why Gridman chose him. I agree, because it clicks everything else into place. Gridman had no memories, but could still feel Yuta's feelings for Rika coming out, which means they existed before Gridman showed up. The thing that happened between Rika and Yuta only comes up again when Yuta is trying to talk about liking Rika. So it's a pretty good bet that he confessed to her that day or something similar, which is why it would be so crappy of him if he was only pretending not to remember. Akane took the designated main character seat for herself in the classroom and banished the copy of her real self to the opposite corner, resulting in the empty desk that Yuta ends up in. And Yuta turns out to be an anomaly. Everyone in this world was made to like Akane, but who does Yuta end up liking? Rika. The real Akane, not the idealized one. That is why Gridman chooses him. Gridman has come to heal Akane, to convince her that she's not as broken or alone or unlovable as she believes. What better vessel, then, than the person who prefers the real version? Thus her come on in his bedroom and inserting herself into Rika's place in the dream, and even insisting that they were dating, were attempts to promote her idealized self over her original self. But Yuta doesn't bite. Her fantasy version falls short of the original in his mind, and so Gridman's mission is to bring Akane to the same conclusion. Yuta may not even be based on a real person, though if he is, I think real Akane needs to go find that guy right away. One of the last things that happens is that it starts snowing, right? Well, snow means love is a very common metaphor in anime, so if you were on the Rika and Yuta ship, I think it's safe to say that it sets sail. And from the scene after it, you might need to add a kaiju and half kaiju ship to go with it. Anyway, that is where I will stop. I'm afraid I don't have the time or the tokusatsu experience to really pull everything apart and do it justice. There's still a ton going on that I never covered, but at least I finally got to make all of my circuitous guesswork fit together thanks to that little ending. That is today's show. We have 4 finales to deal with next week, but it is Christmas and I will get a late start, so the last Casual Monday might instead be Casual Tuesday, but I will see you then.